The hand that closed around Nora's wrist did not ask her name. She was on her knees in the lower kitchen of the Northern Reach, scrubbing a black ring of burnt sugar from the bottom of a copper pot, when two guards came through the door and lifted her off the stone floor as if she weighed nothing. The pot rolled away. Gray water spread across the tiles. Nobody stopped to set it right. "Walk," one of the guards said. "I have not finished," Nora said. "You are finished." They took her up the servants' stair, past the pantry, past the linen room, past every door she had been allowed to touch in 19 years of service, and then through a door she had never once been allowed to open. On the other side was warm air, candlelight, and a smell of cedar and cold rain. She had lived in this castle her whole life, and had never seen this hallway. Her wet shoes squeaked on the polished floor, and she felt ashamed of the sound. At the end of the hall stood an old man in a gray robe, with silver at his collar. Elder Gregory Payne, chief advisor to the king. Everyone in the kitchen knew his face. Nobody in the kitchen had ever spoken to him. He looked her over the way a farmer looks over a horse he did not choose. "Wash her," he said. "Dress her. She marries the king before the sun comes up." Nora laughed. It came out of her before she could stop it, high and wrong, and she covered her mouth with her hand. Nobody else laughed. 3 women took her into a side room and stripped the kitchen off her. They scrubbed her arms until the skin went pink. They cut the ends of her hair with a knife because there was no time to comb out the knots. They put her in a gown of pale gray silk that had clearly been made for someone taller, and they pinned it at the back where it hung loose. One of the women, an older one with kind eyes and hard hands, kept her head down the whole time. "Please," Nora whispered to her, "tell me what is happening." The woman did not look up. "Do not ask questions tonight," she said. "Ask them in a week, if there is a week." Nora's stomach turned over. Here is what she knew about herself, and it was not much. Her mother and father had died when she was an infant. She had been told they were traitors, and she had been told it so often, and so early, that she had stopped feeling anything when she heard it. She had grown up in the kitchen, because the kitchen was where the castle put children nobody wanted. She had no wolf. Every child in the Northern Reach felt their wolf stir by the age of 12, a second heartbeat under the first, a warmth in the chest. Nora had waited. Nothing had ever come. The other servants called her hollow, and after a while she had accepted it, the way a person accepts weather. Wolfless girls did not marry kings. Wolfless girls did not marry anyone. So there had been a mistake. That was the only explanation. Someone had given the wrong name, and in a moment a door would open and Elder Payne would say that he had meant a different girl entirely, and she would be walked back down the servant's stair, and she would find her pot and finish scrubbing it, and in the morning, the cook would shout at her for the water on the floor. The door opened. "It is time," Elder Payne said. They brought her to the old chapel at the north end of the castle, the small one, the one with no windows. There were 4 people inside, a priest, 2 guards, and a man standing with his back to the door, in a dark coat, with his hands behind him. King Adrian Hale of the Northern Reach turned around. Nora had seen him twice in her life, both times from far away, both times as a shape on a balcony. Up close, he was younger than she expected, and colder than she expected. He had a straight, tired face and gray eyes, and he looked at her for exactly as long as it took to confirm that a person was standing where a person was supposed to stand. Then he looked away, at the priest, and said, "Begin." He did not ask her name. The words of the ceremony were short. The priest spoke about the moon, and about blood, and about the joining of 2 lines, and Nora heard almost none of it, because her ears were roaring. When the priest asked for her hand, she gave it, and Adrian took it, and his fingers were warm and dry and steady, and that small, ordinary warmth was somehow the most frightening part of the whole night. There was a silver cup. There was a strip of red cloth, wound once around both their wrists. There was a moment when the priest paused and looked at Elder Payne, and Elder Payne nodded, and the priest went on faster than before, as if he had been given permission to skip something. And then it was done. She was married. It had taken less time than boiling an egg. "The mark," Elder Payne said. Adrian's jaw moved. He turned to Nora, and, for the first time, he actually looked at her face. "This will hurt," he said. "I am sorry." It was the first sentence anyone had spoken to her all night that sounded like it was meant for a person. He set his hand flat against her shoulder where the neck meets it, and something bright and hot spread out from his palm and down through her ribs. It was not pain exactly. It was like being filled with light too fast. Her knees went, and he caught her before she hit the floor, and for a second, his arm was around her back, and her forehead was against his coat, and she could hear his heart going hard and quick, much quicker than his face suggested. When she could stand again, there was a mark on her shoulder, silver white, shaped a little like a crescent. "It is done," the priest said, "before the eclipse. It is done." Elder Payne let out a breath he had clearly been holding for hours. They put her in a room that was bigger than the entire kitchen. There was a fire, there was a bed with 4 posts, there was a window with real glass in it, and through the glass she could see snow falling straight down, no wind at all, and the moon behind it going slowly dark at one edge. Adrian came in an hour later. He had taken off the coat. He stood by the fire for a long time without speaking, and then he said, "They did not tell you anything, did they?" "No. Of course not." He rubbed his eyes. "There is a prophecy. My grandfather's seer left it. It says the king must marry the girl the moon marked, before the blood eclipse, or the line ends with him. I do not believe in it. Payne believes in it. Payne has believed in it for 40 years, and he has spent this entire winter looking for a girl who matches. And tonight, 6 hours before the eclipse, he came to me and said he had found her. And that is me. He says it is you." "I am a kitchen girl," Nora said. "I do not even have a wolf." Adrian looked at her then, properly, the way you look at a puzzle that has one piece too many. "I know," he said. "That is the part he will not explain." They talked until the fire burned low. She could not have said afterwards how it happened. He asked her what she did in the kitchen, and she told him about the copper pots and the terrible cook, and the cat that lived behind the flour bins. And he laughed once, quietly, like a man out of practice. He told her he had not chosen a single thing about his own life since he was 14 years old. She told him that made 2 of them. At some point she stopped being afraid of him. That, she would think later, was the real mistake. Not the marriage, not the mark. The moment she stopped being afraid, she woke in the dark to the sound of the door, and the sight of him already dressed, standing at the window with his back to her, watching the sky go gray. "Adrian? Get up," he said. "There is something I have to do, and you have to be there for it." His voice had changed. It had gone back to the voice from the chapel, flat and closed, and everything warm in her chest turned to stone. The great hall was full. That was the first thing she understood, and it made no sense, because it was barely dawn. The whole court was there, every noble house of the Northern Reach, dressed and waiting, which meant they had been told to come, which meant this had been arranged before she ever woke up. They put her at the bottom of the steps, alone, in the gray gown, with her hair loose and her shoes wrong. Adrian climbed to the throne and did not sit. "Last night," he said, "the terms of the old prophecy were satisfied. A marriage was made before the eclipse. The line is secured. The debt to my grandfather's seer is paid." A murmur went around the hall. "It was a formality," Adrian said. "Nothing more. It is complete and it is finished. And I will not have this kingdom ruled by a servant with no blood and no wolf." Nora heard the words. She understood every one of them separately and could not put them together. "The Luna of the Northern Reach," Adrian said, "will be Diana Marsh." A woman stepped out of the crowd on the left side, tall, dark-haired, in deep green, with the calm of a person walking into a room she had already measured. Nora had seen her before, in the courtyards, in the gardens, always at a distance and always near the king. Diana did not look at Nora at all. She climbed the steps and took her place beside Adrian and turned to face the hall, and the hall began to applaud. "The mark will be removed," Adrian said. And that was when Nora finally understood. 2 guards held her arms. Elder Payne came down the steps with a length of old silver cord wrapped around his hands, and he was smiling. And the smile was the worst thing she had ever seen, because it was not cruel. It was relieved. She looked up at the throne. She looked straight at Adrian Hale, the man who had said, "This will hurt. I am sorry." The man who had laughed at her story about the cat behind the flour bins 6 hours ago, and she waited for him to stop it. He met her eyes. He said, Do it." The cold that went through her when the silver touched the mark was not like the light from the night before. It was the opposite of light. It went in at her shoulder, and it took something with it on the way out. Something she had not known she owned until the moment it was gone, and she heard a sound leave her own mouth that she did not recognize. Then she was on the floor, and the hall was very loud and very far away. They did not put her back in the kitchen. They carried her out through the north gate, past the walls, past the last of the lamps, and they set her down in the snow, on the road where the trees began. "By order of the king," one of them said, and he did not sound happy about it. "If you are seen inside the northern reach again, you will not be brought back here for a second hearing." Then they went away, and the gate closed, and the sound of it rolled off the mountains for a long time. Nora sat in the snow in a torn gray gown as the sun came up over a kingdom she had scrubbed floors in for 19 years. Her shoulder was empty, her hands would not stop shaking. She had no coat, no shoes worth the name, no food, no family, and no name that anyone would open a door for. She thought, quite calmly, that she was going to die on this road before the day ended. And then, under her ribs, low down and small, something moved. She went completely still. It came again, a flutter, then another, slightly apart from the first, on the other side. Not one, two. The first door she knocked on belonged to a farmhouse 9 miles south of the border, and the woman who opened it took one look at Nora's shoulder and shut it again so fast that the wind of it moved her hair. That was how Nora learned the rule. A removed mark leaves a scar, and the scar has a shape, and everyone in the North Country knows what that shape means. It means a king, or an alpha, put his hand on you and then took it back. It means you were judged and found to be nothing. No pack will shelter a woman carrying that scar, because sheltering her is an insult aimed at whoever put it there. And nobody in the villages was willing to insult Adrian Hale over a stranger in a torn gray dress. So she stopped knocking on doors. She learned the other things quickly, because she had to. She learned that a barn is warmer than a house if you burrow under the straw at the back where the animals lean. She learned that you can eat frozen turnips if you hold them against your body long enough to soften them. She learned to walk at night and sleep in the day, because at night, people cannot see your shoulder. She traded the pins from her gown for a coat. She traded the coat's good buttons for bread. She traded her boots for smaller boots and a knife. And she cried about the boots for an hour, and then never thought about them again. And all the while she got weaker, and she knew exactly why, and she did not let herself say it out loud. A removed mark does not just leave a scar, it leaves a hole. The old kitchen women had talked about it the way people talk about a sickness in another village. Half rumor and half warning. A woman whose mark is taken has about a year. The body does not understand what has been done to it. It keeps reaching for something that is not there, and it wears itself out reaching. And one morning, it simply stops. She had a year. She had 2 children coming in 6 months. The arithmetic was not complicated. In a market town called Ashfold, she heard her own story for the first time, told back to her by a stranger. She was sitting against a wall with her hood up, eating a bowl of soup she had bought with a stolen spoon, and 2 carters were talking over her head. "They caught the girl yet?" "What girl?" "The one from the castle, servant girl, went into the king's own rooms on the night of the eclipse and came out with half the silver from the north wing. They put a price on her." "How much?" "Enough that I would hand over my own sister." Nora put the bowl down very carefully so that it would not rattle. So that was the shape of it. Not a wife set aside, a thief who ran. It was clean, it was simple, and it explained everything a person might otherwise ask questions about, and she knew, without being told, that Adrian Hale had not invented it, because Adrian Hale had not needed to. A man who throws you out does not need to explain you. Only a man who is afraid of you does. Elder Gregory Payne was afraid of her. She turned that over in her mind for 3 days while she walked, and it was the first thing since the gate closed that made her feel warm. The hunters found her at the beginning of spring. There were 4 of them, and they were not soldiers. Soldiers wear the crest. These men wore nothing at all, which is its own kind of uniform, and they came into the inn yard at Weyburn asking the innkeeper about a woman traveling alone, a woman who might be carrying, a woman with a mark on her shoulder that used to be something else. Nora was in the stable loft. She heard the whole conversation through the boards. "There is a price," one of the men said. There is a price on a thief, the innkeeper said. You have not once said the word thief. There was a pause. Just tell us if you have seen her. She went out the back of the stable with one bag and no shoes on, into a field of wet spring mud, and she ran until she could not run, and then she walked until she could not walk. And by the time the sun came up, she was 11 miles away, and she understood something new. They had not come to arrest her. Nobody sends 4 men without a crest to arrest a thief. They had come to make sure she stopped existing, and they had been sent by a man who needed the prophecy to be safely, permanently dead. Which meant the prophecy was not dead. Which meant she was still, somehow, part of it. She went south and east, away from every road, into the salt marshes that run along the coast, where the land cannot decide whether it is land. Nobody hunts in the marshes. Nobody lives in the marshes. There are channels that look like paths, and paths that turn into channels, and the fog comes in flat across the reeds twice a day, and a person who does not know the ground can walk in a circle for a week and never see the same reed twice. She lived out there for 11 weeks. She ate crabs and eggs and a green weed that tasted like metal but kept her teeth in her head. She built a shelter out of driftwood twice, and lost it to the tide twice, and built it a third time higher up. She talked to the two of them constantly, because there was nobody else, and because talking kept her awake. She said, I do not know what I am going to do with you. She said, I do not know how to be anybody's mother. I have never even held a baby. She said, but I am not going to let anyone take you, and I am not going to let anyone tell you what you are before you get a chance to find out. The fever started in the 10th week. By the 12th, she could not stand up without holding on to something, and she knew the year the kitchen women had talked about was going to be a good deal shorter than a year. The smugglers found her because she had stopped hiding. They came up one of the deep channels at night with no lamps, 4 men and a woman in a flat black boat, moving salt and iron, and probably worse, and Nora walked out into the water up to her waist, and stood in front of them, and held on to the side of the boat, because she no longer had the strength to be careful. Take me anywhere, she said. I will pay you when I can. The woman in the boat looked down at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Nora's shape, and the look on her face changed. Get her in, she said. The storm came up in the second night out. Nora would remember it in pieces for the rest of her life. Black water going up higher than the mast. Rain coming sideways so hard it hurt her face. The smuggler woman, whose name was Kate, kneeling over her in 3 inches of sloshing bilge water and shouting instructions she could barely hear. The boat dropping out from under her and slamming back up. Her own voice, which did not sound like her own voice at all. Her son was born first, in the worst hour of it, small and furious and screaming loud enough to be heard over the wind. Her daughter came 20 minutes later, in a sudden, strange calm as the storm's center passed over them, and she did not scream at all. She opened her eyes and looked around the ruined little cabin like a person arriving somewhere she had been told about. Kate wrapped them both in sailcloth and put them against Nora's chest. You have to name them, she said. Right now. On the water, it is bad luck to wait. Nora looked down at the two of them. Luke, she said, and Ivy. Then the world went dark at the edges and stayed dark for a long time. She woke in a white room with a high ceiling and a window full of light, and the light was coming off water, and the water was blue in a way that no water in the north had ever been. There was an old woman sitting beside the bed. She was very small and very straight-backed, with white hair cut short like a man's, and she was reading something, and she did not stop reading when Nora opened her eyes. Your children are fed and asleep, the old woman said, still reading. Both healthy. Your son has a temper. Your daughter watches everything. You have been here 9 days. Where is here? The Silver Isles. You were carried into my harbor by 4 smugglers and a woman named Kate, who has been paid, and who says you have a debt to her that she does not expect you to honor. The old woman turned a page. I am Helena, this is my house. Everything you can see from that window is also mine, which is a boring thing to say about oneself, so I will say it once and not again. You are the Empress, Nora said. I am. Nora tried to sit up and failed. Do not, Helena said. You are still dying. I know. You do not know. That is what I wanted to talk to you about. Helena finally put down what she was reading and turned in her chair, and her eyes were pale gray and extremely awake. My physicians looked at your shoulder while you were unconscious. They are the best in 4 kingdoms, and they were arguing about you for 2 days, which they enjoyed enormously. Would you like to hear what they found? Yes. You have a removed mark. That is true, and that is what is killing you, and we can treat it, though it will not be quick and it will not be pleasant. Helena leaned forward. But underneath it, there is something older, something put on you a very long time ago, and put on deliberately, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Nora went cold. Say that again. You have been told your whole life that you have no wolf, Helena said. That is not true. You have a wolf. It has been bound, and sealed, and buried, since you were an infant. Not damaged. Not absent. Locked. She sat back. Somebody went to a great deal of trouble and considerable risk to make certain that you would grow up believing you were empty. I have been a ruler for 51 years, and in my experience, people only do that when the alternative frightens them. The room was very quiet. Outside, a bell rang somewhere down in the harbor. I am dying, Nora said. In a bed, in a country I cannot find on a map, with 2 children who have no father, and a mother who cannot stand up. Yes. So why are you telling me this? Helena smiled for the first time, and it was not a warm smile, but it was a real one. Because I am 83 years old, and I have no children, and no heir, and 11 cousins who are counting the days, she said. Because the Silver Isles need someone after me who was not raised believing the world owes them anything, and because I have just spent 9 days watching a woman who walked out of a marsh and swam to a smuggler's boat, refused to stop breathing, and I find that I am curious about how far that goes. She stood up. She was barely taller standing than sitting. So here is the offer, and I will only make it once. Stay. Let my people treat you. Let me teach you. Learn how a fleet works, and how a treasury works, and how to sit in a room with men who want things, and leave that room with more than you brought in. It will take years, and you will hate most of them. And if I say no, then I will put you and your children on a ship to any shore you name, with money, and you will live quietly, and I will read about your death in a report from a harbor master in about 4 months. Helena shrugged. Both are respectable answers. Only one of them is interesting. Nora looked past her, at the window, at the impossible blue of the water. You said someone bound my wolf when I was an infant, she said. Deliberately. Someone who knew how. Yes. Who has that skill? How many people in the world can do a thing like that? Helena's smile faded slightly. Very few, she said. And it must be done at the source. In person. Within days of the birth. She paused. Which means whoever did it was standing beside your cradle. In the Northern Reach, 22 years ago. Nora thought of a gray robe with silver at the collar. She thought of a length of old silver cord wound around 2 hands. She thought of a smile on the steps of the great hall that had not been cruel at all, but relieved. The smile of a man finally finishing a job he had begun a very long time ago. 22 years ago, she said slowly, was the same year my mother and father were declared traitors and died. Yes, Helena said. I thought you might get there. It took my physicians 2 days. Nora lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling, and for the first time since the gate had closed behind her in the snow, she was not afraid, and she was not ashamed, and she was not tired. She was angry. Teach me, she said. The unbinding took 4 years, and it nearly killed her twice. It was not one procedure. It was hundreds. A seal set on an infant does not come off the way a bandage comes off. It grows into the person the way a wire grows into a tree, and by the time Nora was 22, the wire and the tree were the same object, and every attempt to pull one out took a piece of the other with it. They worked in a stone room under the west wing, where the sea came into a channel below the floor, and you could hear it moving all night. Helena's physicians used salt, and cold, and a slow rhythmic pressure on the old scar, and songs, actual songs, in a language nobody on the islands had spoken for 200 years. Nora lay on a table for hours at a time, with her jaw clenched and her fingers curled, and thought about a copper pot with a black ring burnt into the bottom of it. The first year, nothing happened at all except pain. The second year, the dying stopped. That alone would have been enough. The hole left by the removed mark closed over, the fevers went, and one morning she got out of bed and walked the length of the harbor road and back, and did not have to sit down. The third year, she felt it. It was late, and she was alone in the stone room, and the sea was loud under the floor, and something turned over inside her chest. It was small, and it was slow, and it was not her heart, and she sat up so fast she fell off the table, and then she sat on the cold floor in the dark with her hands over her mouth and laughed until she cried. 19 years of being called hollow. 19 years of standing at the edge of the courtyard while other children changed and ran and rolled in the grass. 19 years of a word she had accepted the way you accept weather. There had been someone in there the whole time, waiting, buried alive. The fourth year, it came out. They took her up to the high cliffs on the north side of the island for it, because Helena said that a first change belongs to open ground and not to a stone room, and because nobody actually knew what was going to happen. 12 people went up the path. 11 of them were physicians and guards. The 12th was Helena, who was 87 by then, and who climbed the whole cliff path on her own feet out of pure stubbornness. It hurt more than the storm, and the marsh, and the silver cord put together, and it lasted about 90 seconds, and then it was over, and Nora was standing on the grass in the wind on 4 legs. Nobody spoke. She was white, not gray, not pale, not silver at the tips, white the whole way through, from nose to tail, the color of the inside of a shell, and she stood a full head taller than any wolf on the islands, and when she turned her head, the guards on the cliff path took a step backwards without deciding to. Helena walked up to her, put one small dry hand flat on her shoulder and said, "Well, that explains a great deal." Later in the study, with the fire lit and the twins asleep upstairs, Helena laid an old book open on the table and turned it round. "The moon-marked line," she said. "White wolves. There have not been more than a dozen in recorded history, and every one of them founded something. Your kings in the north have been gray for 9 generations. Gray is a fine color. It is not this." Nora looked at the painted figure on the page for a long time. "Adrian said there was a prophecy," she said slowly. "He said it named the girl the moon marked. He said the king had to marry her before the eclipse, or his line would end with him. And you believe that is what it says?" "It is what he was told." Helena tapped the page with one finger. "I have read a great many prophecies, and I have never once met one that could not be improved by removing about half of it. A line that ends with the king, a girl the moon has marked. Put those 2 things side by side, and you may read them as a warning that he must take her." She looked up. "Or you may read them as a warning about what she is going to do to him." The room went quiet. "He was not marrying the answer," Nora said. "No," Helena said. "He was marrying the problem, and the man who arranged it knew that, because the man who arranged it had already spent 22 years and at least 2 lives trying to keep the problem in a kitchen." Nora sat back in her chair. "Then throwing me out was never a mistake," she said. "It was the second half of the plan. Fulfill the prophecy on paper, get rid of the girl before anyone looks at her too closely, and put a safe woman on the throne." "That is how I would have done it," Helena agreed. "Though I would not have used a public ceremony. Public is vanity. He wanted witnesses to the discarding." She closed the book. "That was his error. Hundreds of people watched a king throw away a woman as if she were nothing. Every single one of them is now available to remember it differently, the moment it becomes useful to do so." The children grew. Luke was quiet in the way that makes adults nervous. He read early and constantly. He asked questions in a flat voice that were much harder than they sounded. And by 6, he had beaten every harbor master on the island at the counting game they played with shells, and would only play if allowed to go second. He was gentle with animals and with his sister and with almost nobody else. Ivy was the opposite, and the same. She talked from the moment she woke up until the moment she fell asleep, usually in the middle of a sentence. She climbed things that had not been built to be climbed. At 5, she walked into the guard yard, picked up a training staff twice her height, and hit a grown man in the knee hard enough that he sat down. At 7, her wolf came, 3 full years early, which is not supposed to be possible, and it came out silver gray and much too big, and knocked over a bench. Helena watched it happen from the terrace and said, without any particular emotion, Ah, there is the father. Nora did not answer. She had never said his name to them, not once. They knew that they had come from a cold country far to the north, and that their mother had been badly treated there and had left. They knew that the marks on her shoulder were old and that she did not like being touched there. When they were small, they asked about a father, the way children do, and she told them the truth in the smallest possible shape, which was that he was alive, and that he had chosen not to know them, and that the choice had been his, and not theirs, and not hers. Luke stopped asking at 4. Ivy never stopped asking, and Nora respected her enormously for it. Meanwhile, the reports came in from the north, and Nora read every one of them. The Silver Isles ran on information the way the North ran on iron. Helena had ships in every port on 3 coasts, and captains who were paid extra to listen in taverns, and a whole quiet office of clerks who did nothing but read letters and write summaries. Nora spent 2 years in that office before she was allowed anywhere near a council chamber, and she came to love it, because the office was where you found out that the world is not a series of dramatic events but a series of small numbers that eventually add up to 1. The small numbers coming out of the northern reach were bad, and they were getting worse. The grain yields in the upper valleys fell in the first year and did not recover in the second. 2 border districts in the east went over to a neighboring lord, and the king did not have the men to take them back. There was a sickness in the herds in the 3rd year. The iron mines at Cardro flooded, and the pumps could not be repaired because the parts came from the coast, and the coast trade had grown expensive and unreliable. And there was no heir. 4 years married and no child. Then 5. The court had opinions about this, and the opinions traveled, because opinions always travel. Some said the Luna was at fault. Some said the king was. And some, in the lower halls and the kitchens and the guard rooms, where nobody important listens, said something else entirely, which was that a man who breaks a thing in front of witnesses on the morning of an eclipse should not be surprised when it stays broken. There was one report Nora read 4 times. It came from a captain who had wintered at a northern port, and it was mostly about tar prices, and near the bottom there was a paragraph that said the king had for the past 2 years been quietly sending men out along the southern roads, not soldiers, asking questions in villages about a woman who had passed through in the spring 5 years ago. It said the men were paying well for information and were being careful not to say who had sent them. It said the search had recently been extended to the coast. Nora put the paper down and looked out of the window at the harbor for a long time. She did not feel triumph. She had expected to feel triumph. What she felt was closer to disgust, and it took her a while to work out why. And when she did, she said it out loud to the empty room. 5 years, she said. It took him 5 years to want to know my name. Helena died in the winter of the 5th year, in her own bed, sitting up, complaining about the quality of a report. She had timed everything, because she timed everything. The succession papers had been signed 18 months before. The 11 cousins had been dealt with individually and expensively over a period of 2 years. The captains had been introduced. The treasury had been walked through, ledger by ledger, until Nora could recite it. The last thing Helena said to her, 3 hours before the end, was not affectionate, because she was not an affectionate woman. She said, "You will want to do it all at once. Do not. Do one thing, and do it so completely that nobody has to be told twice." Then she said, "You were worth the 9 days," and went to sleep. Nora was crowned 11 days later in the harbor, standing on the sea wall, because that was the tradition of the islands, and because the whole city could see it from the hills. Luke stood on her left in a coat that was slightly too big. Ivy stood on her right and waved at people she knew in the crowd, which was most of them. She was 28 years old. 9 years earlier, she had been on her knees on a kitchen floor scrubbing burnt sugar off the bottom of a pot. The Silver Isles were not a large country. That was the thing that everyone got wrong about them, including, for a long time, Nora herself. They were a scatter of 9 islands, with a total population smaller than one northern province, and they had no great army, and no famous cavalry, and nothing anyone would write a song about. What they had was position. Every ship carrying grain from the southern plains to the northern kingdoms passed through the Silver Strait, because the alternative was 3 additional weeks around open water in seas that killed people. Every ton of worked iron, every barrel of saltfish, every roll of southern cloth, every replacement part for a flooded mine pump came up that channel. The islands did not own the goods, they owned the door. Helena had held the door open for 51 years and charged a fair toll, and never once slammed it, because she said a door you slam is a door people spend money to go around. Nora's first act as empress was to close the northern ports. Not to everyone. That would have started a war with 4 countries, only to the northern reach, and only for grain, iron, and worked metal, and the notice went out with no explanation attached at all, which was the part her council argued about for 6 hours. "They will ask why," her harbor minister said. "Let them ask. They will assume it is a negotiation. It is a negotiation. Empress, with respect, if we give no reason, then every other kingdom on this coast will spend the winter wondering whether they are next, and nervous kingdoms buy their salt elsewhere." Nora looked around the table. "Send a private letter to every other kingdom on this coast," she said. "Tell them their terms are unchanged, guaranteed for 5 years, in writing, sealed. Tell them this concerns the northern reach alone and no one else, and that we consider the matter old and personal. They will be so relieved that not one of them will ask a second question." She stood up. "The North is the only country on this sea that has ever asked us for something and offered nothing back. Nobody will be surprised. Some of them will be delighted." The council sat for a moment. Then the harbor minister, who had served Helena for 30 years and had never once looked impressed, wrote it down. The North held out for 7 months. That was longer than anyone expected, and it cost them everything they had. They emptied the reserve granaries in the first 3 months. They bought grain overland from the east at 4 times the price until the eastern lords worked out what was happening and raised it again. The iron ran out at midwinter, and 2 more mine shafts flooded and stayed flooded. By spring, there were villages in the upper valleys eating seed grain, which is the last thing a farming country does before it stops being a farming country. And all winter, Nora read the reports, and did not smile, and did not sleep especially well. Ivy found her in the study one night, at 2 in the morning, with the maps out. "You have the north face down again," Ivy said. She was 8, and she read upside down better than most adults read right way up. "That is where we came from." "It is. The one where they were unkind to you." "Yes." Ivy climbed into the chair opposite, which she was too big for, and did anyway. "Are the children there hungry?" Nora looked at her daughter for a long moment. It was the exact question she had been avoiding for 7 months, asked by the only person in the world who could ask it without an agenda. "Some of them," she said. "Yes." "Then why do we not open it?" "Because if I open it now, nothing changes. The people who did the unkind thing stay exactly where they are, and they learn that if they wait long enough, the door opens by itself." Nora put her hand flat on the map. "So I am going to open it. But I am going to open it in a room, in front of witnesses, on my terms, once, and after that it will stay open." Ivy thought about this seriously. "That sounds slow," she said. "It is very slow," Nora agreed. "It is also the only kind that lasts." The envoy from the northern reach arrived on the first clear day of spring. He was a thin, exhausted man with good manners and a coat that had been brushed too many times, and he stood in the receiving hall of the Silver Isles and asked, on behalf of his king, for terms. Any terms. He had been authorized to concede more than any northern envoy in living memory had ever been authorized to concede, and everyone in the room could see him deciding how much of it to give away in the first 5 minutes. Nora let him talk for 40 minutes. Then she said, "The Empress of the Silver Isles will negotiate this matter herself." The envoy blinked. "Your Majesty is very generous. I will carry the terms north and—" "You misunderstand," Nora said. "I will negotiate it myself, in person. In the northern reach, in the great hall of the castle, with the full court present, standing witness." There was a silence in the room that had a great deal of shuffling in it. "That is," the envoy said carefully, "a most unusual request. It is not a request." He looked at her and she looked back, and whatever he saw in her face made him stop searching for the polite version of his next sentence. "May I ask why the Great Hall, Your Majesty?" "No." The reply went north that evening, sealed in white wax, carried by the fastest ship in the fleet. It said that the Empress would come at the turn of the month. It said she required the full court assembled. It said the terms were generous and final and would be spoken aloud once. It was not signed with a name, only with the seal of the islands. And in a cold castle 900 miles north, a king who had spent 5 years quietly asking villagers about a woman in a gray dress read a letter from a foreign ruler he had never met, and felt, for no reason he could have explained to anybody, the hair rise on the back of his neck. The doors of the Great Hall opened at noon, and Adrian Hale stood up to greet a woman whose face he could not see. The whole court had been standing for over an hour. They had been ordered into their best clothes, which in most cases meant their only remaining good clothes, and they had been arranged along both sides of the hall in the old formal pattern that had not been used since his father's time. Some of them had not eaten properly in 2 months. Everyone was very aware of that, and nobody said it. The Empress of the Silver Isles came in with 16 people behind her. That was the first thing that struck him, and it struck the entire hall at the same moment. 16, not 400. A foreign ruler walking into the seat of a wolf kingdom that had lost 2 provinces and could still, on a good day, put 9,000 men on a field, and she had brought 16 people, all of them in dark blue, and not one of them looked worried. She wore gray silk and a circle of white metal, and a veil of the same gray, pinned so that it fell from the crown to below her chin. "The Empress does not unveil until terms are agreed," her herald said. "It is the custom of the islands." It was not the custom of the islands. Nobody in the north had any way of knowing that. She sat where they placed her, which was on a chair at the foot of the steps, and she declined the wine, and she opened the negotiation herself, in a low, level voice, without any greeting at all. "You need 11,000 tons of grain before the end of this month, or the upper valleys will not plant," she said. "You need 400 tons of worked iron, most urgently for pump parts at Cardro, where 2 shafts are flooded and a third is close. You need salt. You have very little coin, so you will want to pay in timber, in wool, and in the fishing rights along your western shore. I have brought a treaty that offers you all of it, at a fair price, for 20 years, with the first shipment leaving my harbor before I am home." The hall made a sound, not a cheer, something rougher and more relieved than a cheer. Adrian sat down slowly. "You are extremely well informed, Your Majesty," he said. "I am." "And extremely generous." "I am not generous at all. I am precise. Generosity is what people call precision when it comes out in their favor." Somebody down the hall laughed, and then remembered where they were, and stopped. For the next hour they went through it, clause by clause, and Adrian Hale, who had negotiated with hard men his entire adult life, understood within 10 minutes that he was outmatched in a way he had never once been outmatched before. She knew his harvest numbers better than his own steward. She knew what his timber was worth in 3 markets. When his treasurer tried a small, standard piece of theater about the western fishing rights, she answered him with the exact figure those waters had produced in each of the last 6 years, and the treasurer sat down and did not get up again. And under all of it, running like a cold thread through the whole hour, was the feeling on the back of Adrian's neck that would not go away. It was the voice. It was low and unhurried, and it belonged to nobody he had ever met, and yet every time she reached the end of a sentence, something turned over in his chest, and he found himself leaning forward, and he had to stop himself twice. At the end of the hour, the last clause was read. "Then we are agreed," Adrian said. "Your Majesty, on behalf of the Northern Reach, I accept these terms, and I will say plainly before this court that you have dealt with us far better than we had any right to expect from a stranger. I am not a stranger." The hall went quiet. She stood up. She reached behind her head with both hands, and unpinned the veil, and let it fall. For a moment nothing happened at all, because a hall of 400 people does not understand a thing at the same speed. It moved through them in a wave, from the front rows backwards, a rising noise like water coming in over stones, and Adrian did not hear any of it, because Adrian Hale had stopped breathing. He knew her instantly. That was the part he would think about for years afterwards, not the shock. The instant, total certainty, from a man who had looked at her face for perhaps 90 seconds in total, on the one night she had been his wife. "Nora," he said. "Your Majesty," she said. Halfway down the hall, Diana Marsh had gone the color of paper and had put one hand flat on the back of a chair. And on the steps below the throne, Elder Gregory Payne, who had not moved in an hour, went completely still in a way that only 3 people in that room noticed, and one of them was Nora, and she filed it away. "You are alive," Adrian said. He was on his feet. He was coming down the steps. "You are alive. For 5 years I have had men on every road from here to the southern coast. Every spring, every one of them came back with nothing. I thought." "You thought I died in a field somewhere," Nora said. "That was the reasonable assumption. You had made it very likely." He stopped 3 steps up. "You are the Empress of the Silver Isles." "I am." "How?" "An old woman found me half dead in her harbor and decided I was interesting," Nora said. "The full version takes several hours, and you have not earned it." Somebody in the crowd made a small strangled noise. Adrian came down the last steps. He was close now, close enough that she could see his hands were not steady, and she noted that too, without feeling anything much about it. "You are my wife," he said. The hall exploded. He held up a hand and it settled, slowly, into a hard silence. "The marriage was never dissolved," he said. "There was no annulment. No court sat. It was performed properly by a priest of this castle before witnesses, and by the law of the Northern Reach it stands. Whatever else has happened, whatever crown you now wear, you are my wife, and this is your kingdom, and you are home." For the first time, Nora smiled. It was not a large smile, and there was nothing warm in it at all. "Bring me the book," she said. One of her 16 came forward with a bound volume and opened it on the table at the foot of the steps. It was the Law of the Northern Reach, the Northern edition, printed in the North, 40 years old. "Chapter 9, Nora said. "Bonds and their ending. Read the 3rd clause out loud, please, so that the whole hall hears it." Her man read it. It said that a bond might be ended by the death of either party, or by the joint petition of both before a priest, or by the deliberate removal of the mark by the hand that said it, which act shall be taken in law as full and final renunciation, and after which neither party retains any claim upon the other in property, in title, in blood, or in issue. The silence that followed was the loudest thing that had happened in that hall in 9 years. "You put the mark on me at midnight," Nora said. "You took it off at dawn, with your own order, in this room, in front of every person standing here now. Half of them are still standing in the same place. You did not set me aside quietly. You renounced me publicly, under your own law, in the most complete form your own law recognizes." She closed the book herself. "So no, I am not your wife. I have not been your wife since the sun came up on the 2nd day. You have no claim on me, no authority over me, no right to summon me, no right to detain me, and no standing to speak of me as anything other than a foreign head of state who has just saved your harvest." She looked past him at the hall. "And every person here is a witness to that, exactly as you arranged, on the exact spot where you arranged it." Adrian's face had lost all its color. "Nora." "There is one more matter," she said. "Bring them in." The small door at the side of the hall opened, and 2 children walked in. The boy came first, dark-haired, straight-backed, in a dark blue coat, walking at the unhurried pace of somebody who has been told exactly how long the walk is. The girl came a half step behind him, and did not walk at that pace at all, and looked at everything, and at the carved wolves on the pillars, and at the height of the ceiling, and finally at the man standing in the middle of the floor. They came to a stop on either side of their mother. "Luke," Nora said, "and Ivy. 9 years old this winter." 400 people did the arithmetic at the same time. Adrian Hale looked at the boy, who had his own jaw and his own coloring, and none of his expression. He looked at the girl, who had a face that was almost entirely her mother's, and gray eyes that were entirely his. "They are," he said, and could not finish it. "They are the heirs of the Silver Isles," Nora said. "By the will of the Empress Helena, signed and sealed 6 years ago, confirmed by the Island Council, recognized by 4 kingdoms on this sea. That is what they are, in law, in this hall today. That is the only thing I have come here to say about them. Nora," his voice cracked on it. "Please. You may have 1 hour," she said, "privately. Not with them, with me." They gave him a small room off the north corridor, and he shut the door with his back against it, as if he expected her to leave. "Are they mine?" "Yes." He put a hand over his mouth and turned away, and stood facing the wall for a long moment. "You were carrying them that morning," he said. "I found out an hour after your men left me on the road. I sat in the snow and felt them move. Nora's voice did not change at all. It was the coldest I have ever been in my life, and I remember thinking that whatever happened next, they were not going to grow up in a kitchen being told they were nothing. I did not know. You did not ask. There is a difference, and you have had 9 years to learn it. He turned round. His eyes were red. I have thought about that morning every day since it happened. Good, Nora said. So have I. And here is what I have worked out, over 9 years, with a great deal of time to think. You did not hate me. That would almost be easier. You barely knew I existed. You were told there was a problem, and I was the shape the problem happened to be wearing, and getting rid of me was the tidy solution. And you gave the order before breakfast the way a man signs a paper about a fence. She let that sit. Whatever Payne told you, and whatever he arranged, the words came out of your mouth, in front of your court, and you looked me in the eye when you said them. You were not tricked into cruelty. You were persuaded it was convenient. He did not defend himself. She had expected him to, and had a full answer ready, and it was oddly disappointing not to use it. What do you want? He said. Anything. Say it and it is done. I want the treaty signed by sunset, because I meant every word of it, and your people should not go hungry for your sins, Nora said. And I want to know one thing that only you can tell me. Ask. Where did Gregory Payne find me? Adrian frowned. He said you were on a list of unmarked women of the right age in the household. How long was the list? He never showed me the list. No, Nora said quietly. I did not think he had. She left at midnight for the guest wing, where the island's own people stood at both ends of the corridor, because she was not a fool. At 2:30, one of them put his head round the door of her room and said, in a very calm voice, "Ma'am, the children's door." She was down the corridor in 9 seconds. 2 of her guards had a man on his knees in the doorway of the room where Luke and Ivy were sleeping. Ivy was sitting straight up in bed, wide awake, glaring. Luke had not woken at all. The man on the floor was old and thin and wearing a gray robe with silver at the collar. And wrapped around both of Gregory Payne's hands, exactly as it had been wrapped 9 years ago on the steps of the Great Hall, was a length of old, soft, tarnished silver cord. Nora looked at it for a long moment. Then she crouched down in front of him, so that their faces were level, and spoke very quietly, so that her daughter would not hear. You used that on me, she said, didn't you, when I was small enough to fit in a cradle? And Elder Gregory Payne, who had run the Northern Reach from behind a chair for 41 years, who had never once been caught at anything, looked into the face of a woman he had personally arranged to have thrown into the snow, and made the only sound he had left. He whimpered. They held the hearing at noon in the Great Hall, because Nora insisted on it, and because Adrian Hale no longer had the standing to refuse her anything. The same 400 people came. Some of them had not gone home at all. Word had gone down into the town overnight, and there were people packed into the doorways and along the gallery, servants and cooks and stable hands, and nobody moved them, because the guards on the doors had also grown up in this castle, and had also once watched a kitchen girl carried out of it. Gregory Payne stood in the middle of the floor with his hands empty. The silver cord lay on the table in front of him, coiled on a square of white cloth, and it was a small, ugly object, and it was impossible to look anywhere else. You were found at 2:30 in the morning, the king's justice said, in the doorway of a guest room where 2 foreign children were sleeping, holding that. Explain yourself. I was checking the corridor, with a binding cord. It is an old habit. I carry many things. Elder Payne, Nora said, from her seat at the side. The last time I saw that cord in your hands, you were smiling. He looked at her, and something behind his eyes gave way. It is a strange thing about men who keep a secret for 40 years. They do not break because you press them. They break because for 4 decades, they have been the only person alive who knows how clever they were, and there has never been anybody to tell. You should not exist, he said. Louder, said the justice. She should not exist. Gregory Payne turned to face the hall, and his voice steadied, and he lifted his chin. I have served 3 kings of this house. I have kept this kingdom whole through 2 failed harvests and 1 war and a regency, and every one of you has slept soundly for 40 years because I did not. And you will sit there and ask me to explain myself over a girl. Yes, the justice said. So he told them. The prophecy was real. That was the first thing, and the hall took it badly, because half of them had assumed it was a story the old king had used to frighten his council. It had been left by a seer 3 generations back, and it had sat in a locked case in the archive, and its actual words were shorter and plainer than anything that had ever been said about it. The line of gray shall end with a king. The moon shall mark a white one. What he casts out at dawn shall come back crowned. There is no marriage in it, Nora said quietly. There is no eclipse in it. There is no marriage in it, Payne agreed. I put the marriage in it. The hall made a low, terrible sound. 22 years earlier, he said, a young beta couple in the household had done something no one had asked them to do. The husband worked in the archive. He was permitted to catalog the locked case. He read the true words, and he understood them, and he was foolish enough to be excited by them rather than frightened. And he told his wife, and his wife had just given birth to a daughter with a mark on her shoulder, like a thin white crescent. They were going to take it to the old king, Payne said. They thought they were bringing him good news, a white wolf, born in his own house. They had no idea what they were carrying. So they were declared traitors, Nora said. Yes, by you, by the court, on evidence I provided. And they died. Yes. Nora sat very still. She had known this for 6 years, from the moment Helena had told her that whoever bound her wolf had stood beside her cradle, and she had thought she had finished feeling it. She had not finished feeling it. And me? You were 9 days old, Payne said. I have never been a killer of infants. Whatever this hall now thinks of me, there was another way, and I took it. He looked at the coiled silver on the cloth. A wolf can be sealed in the first days. After that, it cannot. I did it myself in the nursery, at night, and it took most of an hour, and it is the only thing I have ever done with my own hands that I still dream about. And then I put you in the kitchens, and I let you be called Hollow, and I watched you scrub floors for 19 years, and every single year of those 19 years, this kingdom stayed exactly as it was. And the marriage? Adrian said. His voice came from somewhere very cold. Say that part to me directly, Gregory. Look at me and say it. Payne turned. You would not have believed a warning, he said. You have never believed anything you could not weigh. So I did not warn you. I brought you a prophecy with a deadline in it. Because a man with a deadline does not ask questions. He asks how fast. I invented the eclipse. I invented the requirement to marry. I chose the wording so that the thing could be satisfied and finished in a single night. And I chose a girl I already controlled. And then I stood on those steps at dawn and let you complete it for me. Complete what? The renunciation. Payne's voice rose. Do you understand what I bought you? The prophecy said what he casts out at dawn shall come back crowned. A prophecy is a shape. It has to be fed. I fed it a marriage instead of a kingdom. I fed it a mark instead of a throne. I let it eat the smallest possible thing, so it would leave the rest of you alone. And it worked, sire. It worked for 9 years. And it would have worked forever, if she had simply had the decency to die in a ditch, like every other woman in her position. The hall was completely silent. She was 19, Adrian said. She was a shape the future was pointing at. She was 19 years old and she had never done anything to anyone. And you gave the order, Payne said. It landed in the middle of the floor, and nobody picked it up. Because it was true. That was the thing about the whole miserable morning. And everyone in the hall understood it at once. Gregory Payne had built the machine over 40 years. But on the day it needed a hand on the lever, the hand had belonged to the king, and the king had not even been curious enough to ask how long the list was. Adrian Hale sat down on the steps of his own throne like a man whose legs had stopped agreeing with him. Payne was taken away to be held in the West Tower, and the sentence was set for a later sitting, and the hall began to empty, and it was over. Except that it was not, because Diana Marsh was still standing at the front of the crowd, and she had not moved once in 3 hours, and now she stepped forward into the empty floor. I have something to say, she said, and I would like to say it while the room is still full. She looked terrible. She had aged more in one night than in the previous 5 years. I knew, she said. Adrian raised his head. Not the rest of it. Not the prophecy. Not her parents. Not the cord. I did not know any of that, and I do not think anyone in this hall did. Diana's voice was very clear and very flat. The voice of a woman reading her own sentence out loud. But I knew she was not a thief. Gregory told me the story about the silver 2 days before he told it to the court. And he told me because he was checking whether I would repeat it. I repeated it. I repeated it for 5 years, to anyone who asked, and I was very good at it. And I did it because the alternative was not being queen. Somebody in the gallery said something short and ugly. I have thought about her every winter, Diana said. I told myself she was probably alive somewhere and comfortable. It was a very useful thing to tell myself, and I never once tried to find out whether it was true. She turned to face Nora. I am not going to ask you to forgive me. You do not owe me a scene where you forgive me. I only want it said out loud in front of the same people who heard the lie, because you never got to answer it, and now the answer is in the room. She took off the thin circle of northern silver she had worn for 5 years and set it on the table beside the coiled cord. I resign the title, she said. I will go to my family's house in the east, and I will not come back to this court. Then she walked the length of the hall and out, and nobody stopped her, and the sound of her footsteps went on for a long time. Adrian came to Nora that evening in the west garden, where the snow had melted off the walls and the first gray shoots were coming up in the beds. She had known he would come, and she had allowed it, and she had let the children stay indoors. He stood a careful distance away. I have written it all down, he said. Everything Payne said today. It goes out to every district tomorrow, and it goes into the archive unlocked, and it will be read aloud in every market square in this kingdom, in your parents' names and in yours. Whatever else happens, that lie dies this week. Thank you, Nora said, and meant it. That is not what I came to say. I know. He took a breath. Stay. She did not answer. I am not asking you to be my wife. I have no right to ask that, and I know exactly what your law book says. The words came faster now, as if he had been holding them behind his teeth for 9 years, and the gate had finally gone. I am offering you the throne, not beside mine, instead of mine. You are the white wolf, and this was your mother's country and your father's country, and it was taken from you by a man in a gray robe when you were 9 days old. I will abdicate in front of the same court that watched me throw you out. I will do it tomorrow. And then I will stay, in whatever room you put me in, for as long as you will let me, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be a person your children are not ashamed of. He stopped. That is everything I have, he said. That is all of it. Nora looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the hour by the fire, which she had spent 9 years trying to make into a lie, and which had stubbornly refused to become one. She thought about a man who had said, "This will hurt, I am sorry," and had meant it, and had 6 hours later said, "Do it," and had meant that too. She thought that the worst thing about Adrian Hale was not that he was cruel, because he was not, but that he had been raised to believe that being certain was the same as being right, and that a kingdom is a thing you protect from people rather than for them. She thought about her daughter asking, "Are the children there hungry?" "No," she said. He nodded slowly. He had known. She could see that he had known before he asked. "May I ask why?" "Because you are offering me a crown," Nora said, "and I already have one." "That is not." "It is exactly the thing. Listen to what you offered me. You offered to make me something. That is how you have thought about me from the first hour. A servant to be raised, a wife to be discarded, a queen to be installed. You have never once in your life met me at the same height, and you did not manage it today either." She shook her head. "I was not made by you, Adrian. I was not unmade by you, though you tried. I was found half dead in a harbor by an old woman who thought I was interesting, and I spent 9 years becoming this, and the only part you contributed was the road out of the gate." He closed his eyes. "Here is what you will get," Nora said, "and it is more than you have earned, and I have thought about it for a long time." "Tell me?" "The treaty stands, exactly as signed. 20 years, the price I named, and I will not raise it, and I will not use it against you. And when my ships come up that channel, your people will be able to eat. That has nothing to do with you. Your grandmothers and your cooks and the boys in your stables are not responsible for what you did on a morning in the snow, and I am not going to punish them for having a bad king. And the children?" Nora took a moment. "They know your name as of last night," she said. "I told them myself. They know what you did, all of it, in words appropriate to 9 years old. And they know that you did not know about them, and they know that you found out yesterday and cried." "How did they?" Luke has not said one word about it. He will think for about 2 years, and then he will arrive at a conclusion, and it will be permanent, and I would not try to hurry him if I were you." She almost smiled. "Ivy asked 40 questions in 11 minutes, and the last one was whether you are tall." Adrian made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "You may write to them," Nora said. "Twice a year. They may answer or not answer, and I will not read the letters, and I will not influence them in either direction. When they are 16, if they want to come here, they will come here, with an escort, on their own decision. If they never want to, that is also their decision, and you will accept it without a single word of complaint, because you gave up your vote on this a long time ago." She looked at him steadily. "That is the offer. It is not negotiable, and it is not going to improve." "I accept," he said at once. "I know." They stood in the garden a while longer, in the cold, without speaking. "Nora," he said finally, "that night. By the fire, before all of it." "Yes. Was any of it real? On your side?" She thought about lying. It would have been easy, and it would have been satisfying, and it would have cost her nothing at all. "Yes," she said. "That is why it took me 9 years instead of 2. The ships pulled out of the northern harbor at dawn. It was the same hour. She had chosen it deliberately, and had told nobody, not even the harbor minister, who thought it was about the tide. The sky over the water was the same flat gray it had been on the morning they carried her out through the north gate, and the light on the walls was the same, and it was cold in the same way, and Nora Ellis stood at the rail of her own flagship and let herself feel every part of it for exactly as long as it took to feel. Behind them, the first grain barges were already moving in against the current, low in the water, 40 of them, and the whole town was down on the quay watching them come. Adrian Hale stood on the sea wall alone. He was a small, dark shape at that distance, and he did not wave, and he did not turn away either. He stayed there while the ships came about and caught the wind, and he was still there when they were half a mile out, and Nora knew without being told that he would stay there until they were out of sight, and then probably a while after that. Luke came and stood beside her at the rail. He looked back at the wall for a long moment, with the same flat, unreadable expression he had worn through the entire hearing. "Are we going to come back?" he said. "That will be up to you." He thought about it. Then he nodded once, and went below to finish reading whatever he had been reading, which was, Nora reflected, the single most Luke response available. Ivy stayed longer. She climbed up onto the second rail, which she was not supposed to do, and hung out over the water, with one arm hooked around a stay, and squinted back at the small dark figure on the sea wall. And then, because she was 9, and because nobody had told her not to, she waved. Both arms, over her head, the whole body, the way children wave at ships. On the wall, after a moment, the small dark figure lifted one hand. "He waved back," Ivy reported. "Did he?" Nora said. She was facing forward, into the wind, towards the open channel, and the gray line, where the sea met the sky, and the long blue road home. She did not turn around,